At my own engagement dinner, in front of 60 guests, my father stood up, raised his glass at my future husband, and said, "Congratulations, Daniel. You are officially the first thing our Maya has ever finished." 60 people laughed. My mother laughed. My sister laughed hardest and squeezed her husband's arm and mouthed the word savage, like this was a show she had paid for. And I sat there in the good dress I had bought for the happiest week of my life, smiling the smile I had been practicing since the 4th grade, the one that says, "It's fine, I'm fine, everything is fine." But here is the part nobody in my family knew. Standing 40 feet away from my father, holding a glass of wine he never touched, was a man worth more than every business in our county combined, my future father-in-law. And for 11 months, that man's company had been chasing an anonymous tech founder no one had ever photographed, trying to buy her company. Their last offer was $90 million. She said no. My father was telling failure jokes in that woman's honor because the founder nobody could find was standing right there in a navy blue dress, holding a glass of sparkling water, being laughed at by her whole family. Me. The girl who never finished anything. Before we go back to the beginning, I owe you 3 promises, so you know exactly what you're staying for. First, you are going to hear about the envelope my grandmother left me, with $12,000 and a note exactly 11 words long, and how those 11 words became a company that 4 million families use today. You will hear all 11 words. I have never once said them out loud without stopping in the middle. Second, there is a leather folder in this story on a billionaire's desk, in a study that smells like cedar and old paper. 10 days after that engagement dinner, my future father-in-law slid it across the desk to me, tapped it twice, and asked me one question that no one, not my family, not my fiancé, not one living soul, should have been able to ask me. When I tell you what was in that folder, you will understand why my hands are doing this little thing they do, even now, telling it. And third, the wedding toast. My father stood up at my wedding with a microphone and the same joke, and when he was done, a billionaire stood up after him, unfolded one piece of paper, and ended a lifetime of that joke in under 4 minutes. You are going to hear both toasts, word for word. I was there. It was my wedding, and even I did not see it coming. If you have ever been the one your family laughs at, the one they introduce with an apology, do one small thing for me before we start. Tap like, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and tell me in the comments what your family called you. First names only. We keep it kind here. That is the only time I will ask. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and the story of how I became a secret is really the story of 2 toasts, 11 words, and one old woman's marigolds. So let me take you back and tell it right. Stay with me. Every glass raised in this story gets answered. I grew up in a family that kept score. My father ran 3 car dealerships, and he ran our house like a 4th one, and everything, report cards, sports, church attendance, chores, was a leaderboard. He had a word he loved, and the word was finisher. In this family we are finishers, he would say, carving the roast like the roast had also underperformed. Winners finish, and by the family's official scoreboard, he was right about them. My mother chaired every committee in a town that ran on committees. My sister Brooke, 3 years older, was the finisher of finishers, homecoming queen, dean's list. Married at 26 to Craig, a finance climber with a jaw like a bumper and a handshake he practiced on everyone, including children. Brooke's wedding had 400 guests and an ice sculpture of the 2 of them, and I want you to remember the ice sculpture because it comes back, and when it comes back, it is funnier. And then there was me. I want to be honest with you about what I was because this story does not work if I lie to make myself look better. I was not secretly brilliant at school. I was average and distractible, and I quit things. Piano, gymnastics, debate, 2 majors. Some kids fit the mold their family pours, and some kids keep leaking out the sides, and I was a leaker, and in a scoreboard house, a leaker gets a nickname. Mine arrived at Thanksgiving when I was 15. My father was going around the table making everyone say their wins for the year, dealership habit, and Brooke had a trophy and a boyfriend. And when it got to me, I said I had started teaching myself to code from library books. Started. He seized on the word like a bad clause in a contract. Started, he said. Maya, you are a serial starter. And the table laughed, the exact laugh from the engagement dinner 17 years later, the same people, the same pitch, and the nickname stuck the way tar sticks. Serial starter. It went on birthday cards, friends. It was in a toast at Brooke's rehearsal dinner. Haha. Family is the only place a wound gets applause. Now, two things happened in my 20s that this whole story balances on. And the first one is that I flamed out of college in my junior year and handed the scoreboard its final number for me. Officially, the family version, I quit. The true version has a phone call in it. It was October of my junior year, and my grandmother Rose, my father's mother, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Now you have to understand who Rose was in our family because it explains everything after. She was the one who did not keep score. She lived 40 minutes from us in the same little blue house since 1961. With a yard full of marigolds, she started from seed every spring in egg cartons on the windowsill. Keep the marigolds, friends. Of everything in this story, keep the marigolds. When I was small, she would stand me at her kitchen counter on a chair and let me crack the eggs. And when I dropped one, she would say, "Well, that one wanted to be an omelette." And that was the whole punishment. Every quilt in my life came from her hands, and she was the only person on this earth who ever heard my plans, all my doomed little half plans, without doing math on them out loud. So, October, junior year, Tuesday afternoon, my phone rings, and it is Rose, and her voice is wrong. Small, careful, like a woman walking on ice. "Honey," she said, "I have been to the doctor, and it is not good news, and I have not told your father yet, because you know how he gets. He will want to fix it by Friday, and this is not a by Friday thing. It was her heart, and it was her kidneys, and it was, underneath those, just time itself, doing what it does. The doctor said she needed someone with her, not a visitor, a someone. And I sat on the steps outside my dorm with the phone hot against my ear, and I did the only piece of math I have ever done faster than my father. Brooke was newly married and climbing. My mother had committees. My father had quarter end, forever, every quarter, world without end. There was no someone. There was me, or there was a facility. And if you have heard how a proud old woman says the word facility, you know it is not really a word. It is a door closing. I finished the semester, packed my dorm into 6 boxes, and moved into the little blue house with the marigolds. I was 21. And my family, I want this on the record, my family was thrilled. For about 4 days it was. "Maya is so good to do this. Maya, this is so right, since you didn't have anything going on anyway." Did you catch it? Since you didn't have anything going on anyway. That sentence was the whole arrangement. It was never a sacrifice on the scoreboard, because I had nothing to sacrifice. You cannot forfeit a game you were never in. My dropping out to nurse their mother and grandmother full-time was scored as convenient. And the story they told the town, and I heard it told, at a dealership Christmas party, by my own mother, with me holding a tray of cookies 4 feet away, was this. Maya wasn't really thriving at school, so honestly, this worked out for everyone. Worked out for everyone. 3 years, friends. I was there 3 years. Let me tell you what 3 years of caregiving actually is, because the people who have done it are nodding already, and the people who haven't need to hear it once plainly. It is pills at 7, 9, noon, 4, and bedtime. In a weekly plastic case you check 3 times because the white ones look alike. It is 14 different doctors who do not talk to each other. It is being the only person in the room who knows the whole story, the allergies, the dosages, the history, the insurance card number by heart. It is lifting. It is laundry nobody speaks about. It is Tuesday afternoons. I want to stop on Tuesday afternoons because they matter more than anything else in this story. Everyone shows up for the crisis. When Rose had her first bad spell, the whole family filled that hospital hallway like a casting call. Flowers, tears. My father talking to doctors in his negotiating voice. Crises are easy. Crises have an audience. But nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. The flat grey, ordinary hours when nothing is wrong and nothing is right. when the pharmacy is out of one pill, when the ride to dialysis falls through, when a proud woman needs help with a bath and would rather die than ask twice. That is the actual war, and it is fought by one exhausted person at a time, alone, in a million little houses with no scoreboard anywhere. Keep that phrase, friends. Nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. I said it once, years later, in a dining room full of crystal, not knowing it was a fuse. Now here is where my little library book habit becomes the story. Managing Rose's care was chaos. 14 doctors, 3 pharmacies, a dozen relatives who wanted updates without duties, and I could not hold it in my head anymore. So I built a thing. It started as a spreadsheet, then a shared calendar, then, over 2 winters at Rose's kitchen table, on a second-hand laptop next to egg cartons full of marigold seedlings, it became an actual little app. Nothing pretty. Medication times that pinged 3 phones at once. One place for every doctor's note. A ride schedule relatives could claim like a sign-up sheet, so asking stopped being begging. A big friendly button that said, "How is she today?" so people could check in without calling at dinner. I called it, in the file name, Marigold, lowercase, because it lived on a kitchen table under a windowsill of them. And the neighborhood found it. That is the part nobody designed. Rose's church circle saw it on her counter and wanted it for a husband with Parkinson's. Then a nurse at dialysis wanted it for her mother. Then the nurse's cousin, then a Facebook group, and by the 3rd year, there were a few hundred families in 3 states running their whole caregiving lives on my ugly little kitchen table app. And you know what I told my family about all this? Nothing, not one word. You want to know why, and the why is a specific dinner. 2nd year in, Easter, the family at Rose's table, me cooking and serving and dosing and clearing, and my father, watching me type on my laptop while the pies cooled, said, "What is that?" And I was tired. And for one dumb, hopeful second, I was 15 again at Thanksgiving. I said, "I'm building something. It helps organize Grandma's care. Other families are starting to use it too." And my father smiled the smile that comes before the joke, and he looked around the table to collect his audience, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, she's building something." The serial starter strikes again. "Maya, honey, the internet already exists. Set a timer for this one, Brooke, I give it a month." And Brooke laughed, and Craig laughed, and my mother said, "Plates, Maya." And that was the whole hearing my life's work ever got in my father's court. But here is the part I did not tell you. Rose did not laugh. Rose sat at the head of that table with her oxygen line and her Sunday earrings. And she looked at my father laughing, and she looked at me, at the laptop, at the marigolds on the sill. And she got very quiet in a way I did not understand for another year. She understood the app before any of them. She used to call it the ledger of kindness because it kept track of who showed up. Her word, ledger, an old farm wife word. She knew exactly what a ledger proves and what it forgets. And late that night, drying dishes, she said the thing that became the hinge of my life. She said, "Honey, your father has spent 30 years selling people cars they can see in a lot. He only believes in things you can park. You are building something nobody can park, and he will never see it until somebody he respects points at it. So don't show him again. Grow it in the dark, like a seed. That's where seeds work. Grow it in the dark." Friends, when this story gets to a certain wedding reception, and a certain man stands up and points, remember that a dying woman called every ball of it from a kitchen chair 4 years early. Rose died in March on a Tuesday afternoon. Of course she did. I was holding her hand. The crisis crowd made it in time for the last 2 days and stood around the bed being loud with grief, and my father wept, and I will not mock a man for weeping over his mother, whatever else I say about him tonight. The funeral was enormous. Half the county came, because you do not plant marigolds for 60 years without seeding a town. And at the funeral lunch, in the church basement, over ham and scalloped potatoes, my family performed its final audit of my 3 years. An aunt asked what I would do now, and my mother answered for me, the way she always answered for me. "Well," she said, Maya has to figure out her life now. She's 24 with no degree and 3 years of. And then she paused and did the little hand wave and said, babysitting. Babysitting. 3 years, 5 pill times a day, 14 doctors. The lifting, the laundry, the Tuesday afternoons, the last hand she held on this earth. Babysitting. And my father, moving through his grief in the only vehicle he owned, added, we told her, you can't put wiping counters on a resume, Maya. The scoreboard has no column for it. His literal words. The scoreboard has no column for it. I stood in that church basement, 24 years old, in a borrowed black dress, and something in me that had been bending my whole life did not break, friends. It set, like concrete. And I made myself one promise, standing next to the scalloped potatoes, and it was not noble. I will not pretend it was noble. It was cold and it was clear, and it was this. They will never get to laugh at it again because they will never see it again. Not one line of code, not one user number, not $1. I will build it in the dark, like she said. And if it dies in the dark, they were right about me, and only I will ever know. But if it lives, the next time this family hears about my life's work, it will be from somebody they cannot laugh at. Grow it in the dark. 2 weeks after the funeral, her lawyer called me in for the reading of the will. The little blue house went to my father, her only child. Her savings, split among the grandchildren, came to $11,000 for Brooke and $11,000 for me. Even. Fair. Rose to the bone. But when the folders were handed out, mine was thicker. Inside mine, along with the check, there was a second, smaller envelope, with my name on it in her arthritic uphill handwriting. And inside that, a single index card and one more check. The check was for $1,000, separate, made out to me, with a memo line in the same shaky hand. The memo said, seed money. Her last joke, friends. The woman started everything from seed, and she knew exactly what she was doing with that word. And I laughed out loud in a lawyer's office with tears running down my face, while my sister craned her neck to see the amount. And the index card, 11 words. I told you at the start you would hear all 11, and you have earned them, and here is exactly what a dead woman said to the family failure. Bet on yourself just once, honey. The whole pot. Love, Rose. I keep that card in a frame now, in a place you will not guess until I show you, near the end. And that is the whole inheritance the family talked about for years, $12,000. They will say it wasted on the failed daughter. Remember that number, because they are going to try to buy a piece of a 9-figure company with it. I took the $12,000, and I bet the pot. Now I get to tell you my favorite part, the 7 quiet years, the growing in the dark, and I will keep it moving, because the dark is only interesting for what comes out of it. The first thing I did was rent a room over a dry cleaner and eat beans. The second thing I did was find Priya. Priya was a lawyer, 2 years out of school, working out of a shared office that smelled like toner, and I could afford her because nobody else could yet. And it was the second best bet I ever made. I sat down across from her folding table desk and said the strangest thing she had heard all year. I want to build a company where nobody can ever find out it is mine. Not investors. Not journalists, not users. There is no scandal. I'm not hiding from the law. I am hiding from a dinner table. And Priya, God bless her forever, did not ask one question about the dinner table. She just uncapped her pen and said, okay. Then we do it with an LLC, and the LLC needs a name that is not yours. And I already had it. My grandmother was born Rose Merritt. Merritt was her maiden name, the name she gave up in 1958 and kept using her whole life anyway, on preserves, on quilt labels, stitched into corners. RM, RM, RM. 60 years of little initials hiding in the borders of things she made for other people. So the papers said Merritt Holdings. And when the app needed a public founder to sign its letters, the letters said Monsieur Merritt. Everyone assumed the M was for a man's name. I never corrected one soul. My grandmother got a second career 11 years after her death, friends, and some nights filing those papers. I could feel her cackling, and the company grew. I am not going to pretend it was a straight line, because it was 7 years of flat months and server bills and nights I cried into a burrito over churn numbers you would not care about. But caregiving in America is a slow flood. 60 million families in the water. And I had built a boat. And boats get borrowed. 300 families became 4,000. A caregiving blog found us. Then a hospital discharge office started recommending us off the record. Then an insurance company put us in a pilot program. And 4,000 became 90,000. I hired my first employee at year 3, a hospice nurse who had used the app for her own father. And I have never hired any other kind of person since. Everyone at Marigold has held the pill case. That is the whole culture memo. By year 5, there were 40 of us, all remote, which people thought was philosophy, but was actually camouflage. No office, no headquarters photo, no wall for a founder portrait to hang on. The tech press wrote about us exactly twice, and both articles said the same thing. The reclusive founder, M. Merritt, declined to be photographed, and both times I read the word reclusive out loud to my houseplants in my pajamas and toasted them with orange juice. By year 7, the year this story catches up to itself, Marigold coordinated care for a little over 4 million families. The valuation talk from the money people used numbers I still cannot say without feeling like I am lying. And my family knew none of it. I want you to understand how I pulled that off at actual dinner tables, because everyone asks. It was easy, friends, and the reason it was easy is the saddest sentence in this story. Nobody asks the failure follow-up questions. I told them I did tech support and freelance virtual assistant work, remotely, and that it paid the bills, and my mother would wince and change the subject, and that was the entire security system. $15 haircuts and a 9-year-old car did the rest. Their contempt was my camouflage. The scoreboard never audits the last place team. The only thing I could not hide was the tired, and one Thanksgiving Brooke, watching me check a server alert under the table, said, "God, Maya, it's tech support, not surgery." And I said, "You're right, sorry," and put the phone away. There were 4 million families on that server. You're right, sorry. That is what the dark costs, friends, and I am not going to lie to you and call it free. It costs you every clapback you swallow. It costs you standing in the parking lot after Christmas doing breathing exercises while your 9-figure company sleeps in your purse. And some Tuesday afternoons, it costs you wondering if the concrete thing you set in that church basement was a spine after all, or just a wall you would die behind, alone and technically right. I need to show you one more scene from the dark years, because you should know exactly what the camouflage cost and how close it came, twice, to tearing. Year 5. The company had just crossed 1 million families. That week, an actual magazine had called Priya's office asking to profile the mysterious M. Merritt, and we had declined, and I had celebrated the 1,000,000th family alone in my apartment with a grocery store cupcake and a candle, singing to my houseplants. That Sunday, my family staged an intervention. For me. I am not using the word loosely, friends. They used it themselves. My mother said it in the driveway. "We are doing a little intervention, honey," like it was a brunch format. They sat me on the good couch, the couch of announcements, and arranged themselves around me, and my father cleared his throat and presented with the gravity of a man unveiling a sedan, their offer. A job. At the dealership. Front desk to start, he said. But with a path, Maya, a real path, benefits, a name tag, structure, because honey, you are 30, and this tech support drifting has to stop somewhere, and we have all been talking, and we are worried sick. A name tag. I want to be fair, friends, and fairness here is the sharpest knife in the drawer. From inside the picture they could see a 30-year-old with no degree, a 9-year-old car, and a job title made of fog. The worry was almost love. Almost. Except that love asks questions, and worry about your image just issues corrections. And in 30 years, not one person on that couch circle had ever asked me a single follow-up question about my days. Not one. What are you working on? Not one. Are you happy? My mother cried a little, at the beautiful selflessness of the offer. Brooke, 8 months pregnant and luminous with rightness, told me that honestly this was about dignity, Maya, because it is getting embarrassing explaining you to people. And Craig. Craig leaned back with his arms spread along the couch like a man who owned patience itself and delivered the line that got framed and hung in my skull for the rest of the war. He said, "Look, no offense, but somebody in this room has to understand how money actually works. Friends." At that exact moment, in my purse, on my phone, on the screen it had gone to sleep displaying, was a term sheet from a venture fund valuing my company at $340 million. Declined, obviously, but there, 11 inches from Craig's knee. Somebody in this room has to understand how money actually works. I looked around that living room, at the couch of announcements, at 4 faces arranged in loving formation around a person none of them had ever met, and I felt the strangest thing, and I have heard other secret keepers describe it too. So I know it is a real thing, and not just me. I felt lonely in the specific way you can only feel lonely while being discussed. And I said, "Thank you all, let me think about the desk job." And I drove home under the speed limit the whole way, gripping the wheel of my 9-year-old car, saying out loud, alone, "Grow it in the dark, grow it in the dark, grow it in the dark," until it turned back into a plan instead of a scream. The second tier in the camouflage was smaller and worse. Year 6, a few months before the farmer's market. Marigold was closing its first big hospital system pilot, and I sat in on the final call. Voice only, as always. Listed on the agenda as founder, no name, and the hospital's side had brought their outside diligence consultants onto the line. And a voice came through the speaker, confident, practiced, a handshake in audio form, walking through our user retention numbers, calling them, and I quote, "honestly hard to believe for a company nobody's ever profiled." I knew the voice before he said his name, not Craig. Craig came later. I told you, Craig was still selling copier contracts back then. It was a man Craig would eventually work beside, at the same firm, in the same beige acre of cubicles. And when he introduced himself, firm name and all, I wrote the firm's name on a sticky note, and under it, I wrote one word. Someday. I am not a mystic, friends. I do not believe the universe leaves us notes. But I keep my stickies. It is the whole job. And years later, when Priya said the name of the firm Craig had just joined, I walked to my corkboard, and there it was in my own handwriting, curling at the edges. Someday. The dark teaches you to file things. File everything. You never know which Tuesday afternoon you will need it. Which brings me, at last, to the farmer's market, and to Daniel, and to the part of the story where the light gets in. Year 6, a Saturday in May. I was at the marigold seller's stall, because I plant them every spring. Egg cartons first, windowsill, the whole liturgy, and there was a man there buying, and I promise you this is true, 40 marigold plants. 40. He was arguing gently with his own math, and losing, and I said, "That's a lot of marigolds." And he turned around, tall, glasses, flannel, dirt already under his nails at 9 in the morning, and he said the sentence I would eventually marry. I teach 7th grade science, and I promised my class if they passed the state test, we would plant a butterfly garden, and they passed, all of them. So now I am a man who needs 40 marigolds and owns 1 shovel. Friends, I helped him carry flowers to a 15-year-old pickup truck with a middle school parking pass on the dash, and by the 3rd trip I had told him my grandmother started hers from seed in egg cartons, and by the 5th trip he had asked if I would maybe want to come show a bunch of 12-year-olds how, since I clearly knew things. That was our first date, 26 kids, a bag of potting soil, and a boy named Marcus, who asked me if flowers can tell when you don't care about them. I think about Marcus's question a lot, friends. The answer is yes, by the way. Everything can tell. Daniel Hale. That was the name on his classroom door, on his coffee mug, on the parent newsletters, Mr. Hale. He drove the old truck, rented half a duplex, graded papers with a red pen he kept losing behind his ear, and made $40,000 a year on purpose. On purpose. Hold that. We dated for a year and a half, and it was the easiest thing I've ever done. and the whole time, both of us, and neither of us knew it, were doing the exact same strange dance, getting quiet when family came up. He knew my family kept score and thought I was the blooper reel. I told him that much early, and he held my hand and said, "Their scoreboard is broken," and did not push. I knew his mother was gone, that it still had a fence around it, and that his father was complicated and worked a lot, and I did not push either. Two careful people, being careful in the same direction. You can love someone completely, friends, and still keep one room locked. I should know. I had a whole company in mine. He proposed in his classroom in June, with the butterfly garden blooming outside the window, second summer of it, marigolds gone feral along the fence, and he did it with a twist tie from the seed packets bent into a ring shape. Because, he said, the real one is in my pocket. But I wanted to ask you with something from the garden first. I said yes to the twist tie. The real ring never really stood a chance after that. And then, that night, on the tailgate of the truck with grocery store champagne, my brand new fiancé got quiet in a way I had never seen, quiet like a man at a diving board. And he said, "Before you tell your family, there is something I have to tell you about mine." And I sat there, and my stomach dropped, and I thought, here it is. Everyone has a locked room. Here comes his. He said, "My last name isn't Hale. Legally it is. I changed it at 25. Hale was my mother's name." And I said, "Okay, changed it from what?" And he looked out at the parking lot of the middle school where he had chosen to spend his one life, and he said, "Voss. My father is Edward Voss." Friends. Even I knew the name, and I lived under a rock professionally, on purpose. Voss Health owned hospital systems in 11 states. Voss Logistics moved a percentage of everything you have ever bought. Forbes did not print his net worth so much as estimate it annually, the way you estimate weather. Edward Voss was a billionaire the way other people are tall, and his only child taught 7th grade science under his dead mother's name and drove a truck older than his students. I asked him the only question that mattered. Why? And Daniel turned the champagne cup in his hands and told me about his mother, and I am going to save most of what he said for the study where it belongs, but the shape of it was this. His mother, Miriam, died when he was 19. It was long and it was ugly, and his father fought her illness the way he fought everything, with money and fury and total command, and won every battle except all of them. And afterward, the house had a hole in it shaped like the only person who had ever treated the two of them like people instead of positions. And Daniel walked away from the empire and became the thing his mother had been before Edward, a teacher. The last thing he said on that tailgate, before we drove home engaged, was, "My dad is not a monster, Maya. He's just a man who thinks anything that matters can be acquired. You'll see. Try not to take him personally. You'll see," he said. Friends, you have no idea. He had no idea. Nobody, and I want credit for this, nobody in this entire story had any idea what was about to happen at one engagement dinner, except, I like to think, a dead woman with dirt under her nails, laughing somewhere behind the borders of things. The engagement dinner was my mother's project from the moment the ring hit her radar. And when she learned who Daniel's father was, friends, I watched a woman discover her true religion at 59. The Voss name did something chemical to my parents. My father started saying "we" in sentences about Edward's businesses. My mother bought 3 dresses and returned 2 with a rigor she never applied to my childhood. And Craig, my brother-in-law, Craig the handshake, Craig of the finance dreams, began rehearsing. I truly mean rehearsing. Brooke told me, proudly, that Craig had prepared talking points on the regional healthcare market in case he got 5 minutes with Mr. Voss, because a connection like this could change everything for us, Maya. For us. The family had located a use for me at last, friends. 31 years old, and I had finally produced something the scoreboard could read. A door. The dinner was at a restaurant my father chose for its chandeliers. A private room, 60 guests, 3/4 of them ours, which tells you everything. Daniel's side was his father, an aunt, and 2 men from Edward's office whose whole job seemed to be standing near him. And Edward Voss. I had met him once before, briefly, a handshake at a lunch where he was pleasant, punctual, and gone in 40 minutes. This time I watched him. Silver-haired, quiet suit, no watch, which I noticed and filed, a man past proving things. He drank nothing, said little, missed nothing. He had a way of listening with his whole face that felt less like courtesy and more like an audit. And my family performed for him all night, and I watched him catalogue us dish by dish. And I remember thinking, with a strange calm, he sees exactly what this is. And then the toasts. My father stood, dinged his glass, told 2 dealership stories that were really about himself, and then arrived, glowing, at me. And I knew the shape of the wave before it broke. Friends, I had 31 years of surf experience. "Congratulations, Daniel," he said. "You are officially the first thing our Maya has ever finished." And the room did what rooms trained by my father do. 60 people laughed, and I held my practiced smile. And under the table, Daniel's hand closed over mine hard enough to leave a mark I was grateful for. But my father was not done. Oh no. He had an audience with a billionaire in it. "Don't worry about her, Edward," he said, waving his glass at me like a tour guide. "Our Maya is our free spirit. Tech support, virtual assistant, little apps, always something. We used to call her our serial starter. Brooke here got the follow-through in this family, and Maya got, and he paused, timing it, the way he timed it at every table of my life, and Maya got such a good heart. Such a good heart." Friends, in my family that phrase was a participation trophy handed to a corpse. And 60 people laughed again, and my mother laughed, and Craig laughed one beat too loud with his eyes on Edward to see if the joke had landed with the money. And Edward Voss did not laugh. I know because I was looking at him, the way you look at the one dry spot in a rainstorm. He was looking at my father with an expression I could not read yet, though I have since learned it well. It is the face he makes when a number does not reconcile. And then, friends, dessert happened, and with it, the fuse. It was such a small moment. Nobody at that table would remember it but me and one other person. Daniel's aunt, his mother's sister, a kind woman named Lily, was seated across from me, and we got to talking, really talking. And it came out that her husband had Parkinson's, and that she was drowning in it, the 14 doctors, the pharmacy runs, the relatives who wanted updates without duties. And I forgot myself. For 4 sentences, friends. I forgot the dark, because a tired woman across a table is the one thing I have never once been able to leave unanswered. I said, "The crisis part. Everyone will show up for that. It's the other part no one builds for. Nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. You need a system that treats the boring days as the real war, because they are." And Aunt Lily blinked and said, "That's her. That is exactly right." And I said, "Someone gave me that phrase once, and I made 2 fists under the tablecloth and put my smile back on and turned the conversation like a car with bad steering and thought, sloppy, Maya, sloppy. 4 sentences. And from the head of the table, 16 feet away, through 60 people's chatter, Edward Voss turned his head and looked at me. Not a glance, friends, a recalibration. I told myself he could not have heard. I told myself billionaires do not eavesdrop on the middle of the table. I have since learned that eavesdropping on the middle of the table is roughly 40% of how you become one. 10 days later, the invitation came. Not to us, to me. Daniel got a text from his father's assistant, wonderfully bland. Would Maya be free Thursday at 4 to come by the house? Mr. Voss would like to get to know his future daughter-in-law. Just the 2 of them. Informal. Informal. Friends, I have read thousands of user agreements. Informal is my favorite word in the language for how hard it works at being a lie. Daniel was delighted and mildly stunned. He does not do this, he said. He didn't do this with anybody. And I smiled and said how nice. And inside me, quietly, a system administrator pulled up the logs from the dinner and started reviewing everything I had said within 100 feet of that man. The Voss house was not what I expected. Old. Actually, old. Stone and slate. No fountain. No gate with initials, just long lawns going shaggy at the edges like the gardener had standing orders to let things be a little alive. A housekeeper walked me back through rooms that got smaller and warmer as we went, which is backwards from how intimidation architecture usually runs, and I noticed it, and noticed myself noticing, and my pulse would not sit down. And then the study. Cedar and old paper, that smell, books actually worn, a desk the size of a rowboat, and on the wall behind it, where the portrait of the founder goes, a framed pencil drawing of a monarch butterfly, signed in the corner in a child's hand, D. Voss, age 9. Daniel, the butterfly garden teacher. Some things you understand instantly and completely, friends, and the wall of that study was one of them. Edward stood, shook my hand, sat me in a leather chair worn to the shape of 100 harder meetings, offered me coffee from an actual thermos, which nearly disarmed me, and made 4 minutes of genuinely skilled small talk. And then he stopped, the way weather stops before it turns, and he said, "Maya, I'm going to show you something, and then I'm going to ask you one question, and I would take it as a great courtesy if we could skip the part where we pretend." And he opened a drawer and took out a leather folder and slid it across the desk and tapped it twice. I told you about this folder at the beginning, friends. Here is what was in it. The first page was a report from his mergers team, dated 11 months earlier, recommending the acquisition of a private company called Marigold Care Technologies. The second page was a summary of 3 approaches made through our counsel, Priya, and 3 declines, each politer and firmer than the last, the final one declining an offer of $90 million. The third page was a memo from an investigations firm, very expensive, very thorough, reporting with visible frustration that the identity of the founder, one M. Merritt, could not be established, that the trail ended at a law office over a former dry cleaner, and that the initial possibly stood for Michael, and the fourth page. The fourth page was a printout of the letter M. Merritt publishes to every new Marigold family on their first day, the letter I wrote at Rose's kitchen table 9 years ago, the letter that contains, in its second paragraph, 11 words. Nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. The line was highlighted in yellow, and in the margin, in fountain pen, in a strong slanted hand, one word, dinner. I sat in that leather chair, friends, holding my entire secret life in a folder that smelled faintly of cedar, and the room was very quiet, and Edward Voss looked at me across the rowboat desk, not unkindly, not kindly, just entirely, and asked his one question. He did not ask, "Is this you?" He was past that, the folder was past that, we were both past that. He leaned back and folded his hands and asked, "Why did you turn down $90 million, Miss Merritt?" Miss Merritt, friends, I want to be honest with you about the next 10 seconds because I have replayed them more than any other 10 seconds of my life. 9 years of cover story stood up in my throat, ready to perform, and then they sat back down. Because there are exactly 2 kinds of moments, and my grandmother taught me the difference at a kitchen counter. Some moments want an omelette, and some eggs are done being eggs. So I told the truth, I said, because everyone who ever offered to buy it wanted to own it, and it is not ownable. It is a promise to 4 million exhausted people that somebody finally built the boring days a system, and the first thing a buyer would do is put the crisis up front because crisis sells, and quietly sunset the Tuesday afternoons, because boring doesn't. And I would rather stay small and keep the promise than get enormous and become the thing it protects people from. Also, I said, and I do not know where this came from, except I do. It came from a church basement. Also, Mr. Voss, with respect, I have spent 9 years making sure no one could take it away from me, and $90 million is just a politer way of taking. Silence. Long enough that I heard a clock somewhere deeper in the house. And then Edward Voss took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose and did the very last thing on earth I was braced for. He laughed, not a boardroom laugh, a real one, from somewhere unrehearsed, a laugh with rust on it like a door not opened in years, and when it wound down, he put his glasses back on and looked at the butterfly drawing on the wall for a moment, and he said, "My wife used to say almost exactly that. Not about companies, about me." And then, friends, in a study that smelled like cedar and old paper, my future father-in-law, one of the richest men in the country, told me about Miriam. And I understood, finally, why his firm had spent 11 months chasing a kitchen table app with a flower for a name. Miriam Voss had been a high school biology teacher when Edward met her, and she stayed one for 6 years after they married, until the empire got too big to be married to part-time. She was, by his accounting, the only person who was never once impressed by him, which is why he never once bored of her. And 12 years ago she got sick. A slow, cruel neurological thing. 4 years from diagnosis to the end. And Edward Voss did what Edward Voss does. He acquired the best neurologist on 2 coasts, a wing of specialists, nurses in shifts, equipment, a medical director for 1 patient. He built, he said, a $90 million hospital around 1 woman. And I want you to notice the number he chose for that sentence, friends, because I noticed it, and he watched me notice it. And none of it worked, he said, not the way it needed to. Not because the medicine failed, because the system had no conductor. 14 specialists who never spoke to each other. 3 pharmacies contradicting, nurses rotating out just as she trusted them. And a 19-year-old boy, home from his first year of college, sitting on the stairs outside her room every night with a yellow legal pad, keeping the actual list, medications, reactions, questions nobody answered. Which doctor said what? Because somebody had to hold the whole picture, and the richest man in the state had built a cathedral of care with no one in it who held the whole picture. My son, he said, was the app, Maya. A teenager with a legal pad was the entire coordination layer for the best-funded patient in America. And he burned out on it, and he blames me for what those years were. And he is not wrong. And he became a teacher like her, and changed his name to hers. And I let him go because everything I know how to do made it worse. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, 4 years ago my sister-in-law Lily's husband got his diagnosis, and I offered her everything, and she said, no thank you, Edward, we have a system. And she showed me an app on her phone, and I sat in my car in her driveway for 1 hour reading everything M. Merritt ever published. Nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. I have thought about that sentence, he said. Every week for 4 years. I tried to buy it for 11 months. And then 10 days ago, I watched a car salesman raise a glass and explain to my table, in the founder's own voice, without knowing it was the founder's own voice, that his daughter never finished anything. Friends, we sat there, the 2 of us, in the quiet, with the folder between us. 2 people who had both built rooms nobody was allowed into. And I will tell you the strangest thing about that afternoon. It was the first conversation of my adult life where I did not perform 1 single sentence. Not one. He asked what I wanted, long-term, actually wanted, and I told him about the promise, and about hiring only people who had held the pill case, and about the insurance pilots, and the hospital discharge desks, and how the thing choking us was not money, it was reach, the millions of families who needed the boat and had never heard of it. And he listened like an audit and asked 4 questions sharp enough to shave with. And then he said, all right, 2 things, and then you should get home before Daniel eats both the dinners. Thing 1, your secret is yours. I have kept harder ones longer. You will tell my son yourself soon, because a marriage with a locked room in it grows mold. I know this personally, but you will do it on your own clock, not mine. Thing 2. He picked up the folder and turned to the last page, the letter with the yellow highlight, and looked at it a moment. The offer is withdrawn, he said. I don't want to buy Marigold anymore. I want to be wrong about something in front of you, Miss Merritt. That is a service I can no longer purchase at my level, and my instinct says partner, not owner. Whatever that looks like on your terms, draw it up with your dragon of a lawyer over the dry cleaner, and I will sign what she sends, or I will sign nothing. No committees, no sunsetting the boring days, and if I ever behave like a buyer, quote my wife at me, she would like you. God, she would like you. And then he walked me out through the rooms that got bigger and colder toward the door. And at the door he shook my hand and held it 1 extra second and said the sentence that made me cry in my 9-year-old car in his driveway. He said, for whatever an old acquirer's opinion is worth, your grandmother's $12,000 is the best performing seed investment I have ever audited. Finish nothing for them, Maya. Finish everything for her. He knew about the 12,000 friends. The folder knew. The folder knew everything except my name, and now it knew that too. And driving home past the shaggy hedges, I understood that for the first time since a church basement, somebody on the scoreboard side of the world was holding my ledger and had marked it, in fountain pen, paid in full. Now, I know what you are asking. You are asking, did she tell Daniel that night? And friends, I need you to stay with me through this next part. Because this is the part of the story where I make my mistake, and I am not going to skip it, because you do not get the wedding without it. I did not tell him that night. I meant to. I rehearsed it against the steering wheel the whole drive, and I walked in, and he was at the kitchen table under one lamp, grading vocabulary quizzes with the red pen behind his ear, and he looked up and smiled and said, "Well, did the old man behave?" And the sentence I had rehearsed it did not come out. What came out was, "He was lovely, we talked about your mum," and Daniel's whole face went soft and complicated, and we talked about Miriam until midnight, and the moment passed. And then a week passed, and then a month, friends, and here is the truth about why, the ugly load-bearing truth, and if you have ever kept a secret one season too long, you already know it. It was not that I feared Daniel would love the money instead of me. He had walked away from money like it was a burning building. It was that the dark was mine. 9 years. The dark was the only room where nobody had ever laughed, the only thing I had never had taken from me and handed to Brooke, and the person I would become out loud, in the light, in front of everyone. That woman was a stranger I had met exactly once, in a cedar study, for 90 minutes. I was not hiding the company from Daniel. I was hiding from her. So I set a date, coward's math, after the wedding, quiet honeymoon morning, coffee, the whole story, clean start. The wedding was set for the second Saturday of October at an orchard venue because Daniel and I wanted apples and hay bales and his students' families invited, and my mother wanted chandeliers, and we compromised on apples, hay bales, and my mother weeping about napkins. And 10 days before it, friends, 10 days, the roof came off my whole life, and the crowbar was, of course, Craig. Craig, the handshake. Craig, the talking points. Craig, who had spent months trying to leverage the family's new Voss adjacency into a job upgrade, and had finally, that fall, clawed his way into a contract analyst seat at one of the firms that did diligence work for Voss Capital. The family threw him a dinner for it. I want that noted. A dinner for a contract seat at a firm that worked for the man whose folder had my whole life in it. The scoreboard celebrated its own bomb. Here is what happened, as I pieced it together afterward. Some from Priya, some from Edward's counsel, some from Craig's own bragging, because of course he bragged. An associate at Craig's firm was cleaning up loose files from the dead Marigold acquisition, dead because Edward had ordered it withdrawn, and Craig, hungry, snooping for anything with Voss on it, pulled the folder. And Craig, alone in the whole confused world, had an advantage no investigator ever had. Craig had sat at our Easter table. Craig had heard my father say, "She's building something. It helps organize Grandma's care. Set a timer. I give it a month." Craig knew Rose's maiden name. It was on the funeral program, Rose Merritt Callahan. He had held the program in his hands while my mother said the word babysitting over scalloped potatoes. Monsieur Merritt, Marigold, a care coordination app started the exact year Grandma died. The founder no one could photograph. Craig sat in a beige cubicle with a non-disclosure agreement he had signed that same month, and did the only piece of brilliant math of his entire life. And friends, I want you to guess what he did with it. He did not come to me. He did not even sell it to a journalist, which would at least have had the dignity of greed. He took it to my parents. He drove to their house on a Tuesday night, laid the folder photos out on the kitchen island like a realtor, and presented my life's work to my mother and father as an asset the family had just discovered it owned. And that, friends, is when my phone rang. It was my mother. And her first words, the very first words, after 9 years of the dark, were not, "Maya, is it true?" or "Maya, we are so proud," or even "Maya, how could you not tell us?" Her first words were, "Maya, honey, we need to talk about what you owe this family, what I owed this family." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I remember looking at my own reflection in the dark window over the sink, And the woman in the glass looked back at me like, well, there it is. 9 years we prepared for this call, and here it is. And it is worse and stupider than every version we drilled for. I said carefully, what is it you think we need to talk about, Mum? And she told me. Oh, friends, she told me, in the bright, brisk voice she used for committee budgets. And I am going to give it to you almost word for word, because paraphrasing it would be a mercy it did not earn. Craig has shown us everything, she said. The company, the offer, the $90 million, Maya, $90 million. And you let your father stand up at that dinner and make a fool of himself with his little jokes. Notice, friends, the jokes became the injury and the fool became my father in the first 30 seconds. The scoreboard is a gymnast. And then she got to the meat, and her voice did the thing, the soft, reasonable swoop, the one that had moved me into smaller bedrooms my whole life. Now, honey, we have all talked, and we think it is wonderful. We always knew you had something in you. We always said so. But you have to be fair about where this came from. That app was built on Grandma Rose's care. Rose was this family's mother, not just yours. You built it in her house, on her illness, with her money, honey, and that $12,000 was family money. It only came to you because you happened to be there. I happened to be there. 3 years, 5 pill times a day. I happened to be there, the way the ocean happens to be wet. And so, she said, Dad and Craig and I have talked it through, and Craig has run the numbers. Craig is in finance now, you know, and we think the clean thing, the fair thing, the thing Rose would want, is that the family is recognized. A third. They wanted a third, friends. Not of the $12,000 back. A third of Marigold. For the family to be held through your father, and Craig can manage the family's interest, it just makes sense. He's already inside the industry. And then, when I said nothing because there was a sound in my ears like a kettle, she played the last card. And this is the one I need you to hear all the way. Because this is who I had been protecting my life's work from since a church basement. She said, and honey, before you get emotional, the wedding is in 10 days, 200 people, Daniel's whole side, all those fancy Voss people. It would be such a shame if all this came out messy at the wedding instead of settled and happy before it. You know how things get out. Craig worries he may have obligations to report things. Let it be a gift, Maya. Announce it at the reception, the family business, all of us together, a united front. Rose would be so proud. There it was. Sign over a third of the company. Or we detonate your secret in the middle of your wedding and we will call the bomb a bouquet. And the fuse a family. And Rose, they put Rose's name on it. The woman who told me to grow it in the dark specifically because of them. I said, in a voice I did not recognize, one word, and I am proud of the word. I said, Mom, I will call you back. And I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen, and did not cry. And that scared me more than crying. And I picked the phone back up, and I did not call Priya. Though Priya was cool too, and she was magnificent. We will get there. Call 1 was Daniel. Because there was one bomb in my mother's speech worse than the third, worse than the threat, and she did not even know she had dropped it. 200 people would survive my secret coming out at the wedding. One person would not survive hearing it from a microphone, or from Craig in a parking lot, or from anyone on this earth who was not me, 10 days before promising me his life. And friends, when I called, it rang twice and went to voicemail. Daniel never sent me to voicemail. I drove to the duplex with my heart in my mouth, and his truck was there, and the kitchen light was on, and when he opened the door, I knew before I saw the phone in his hand, because his face was a room with the furniture moved out. Brooke. While my mother was working me, Brooke had texted Daniel. I have seen the text. It said, Welcome to the family, Luell. Guess you're not the only one marrying money. Ask your dad about Marigold, and then a winking emoji. Friends, a winking emoji. My 9 years, my grandmother's 11 words, my whole locked room, delivered to my fiancé as a gotcha with a punctuation face on it. So here is where the story stands, 10 days out. My family holds my secret like a hostage and wants a third of my company for its release. And the man I love is standing in a doorway, holding a text message, looking at me like the scoreboard finally posted a number he could not read. He let me in. He put the kettle on. Because he is Miriam's son to the marrow, grief in that house always got tea first. And then he sat across the little table where he grades quizzes, and he was quiet a long time. And when he finally talked, friends, he did not ask about the money, and he did not ask about the 90 million. And he did not ask why the world's most private founder was marrying a middle school teacher. He asked the one question I had no armor for. He said, "My father knew. You told my father before you told me." And I want to be very careful here, because I have heard 100 stories like mine where this is the part the teller skips, the part where the wronged narrator was also, for one chapter, the one doing the wounding. I did not skip it then, and I will not skip it now. Yes, his father knew first, not because I chose Edward over Daniel, but because Edward caught me and Daniel trusted me. And friends, being caught costs nothing. Being trusted is the expensive one. And I had been dodging the bill for a month. I told him everything at that quiz table, the church basement, the concrete, the promise, all of it backwards to the beginning. And when I got to the real reason, the one I told you already, that the dark was the last room they never got to laugh in, and that the woman who owned Marigold out loud was a stranger I was afraid to become, Daniel put both hands flat on the table and looked at them and said quietly, "I changed my whole name, Maya. You are sitting across from the one person alive who knows exactly what you were doing. That is not why it hurts. It hurts because I told you about Voss on a tailgate the night you said yes, scared to death, and you held it, and I thought, this is the person I never have to be careful with. And you were being careful with me the whole time." Friends, there is no reversal in this story, no folder, no toast, that cost me more than that sentence, and none I deserved more. He did not yell. It would have been easier if he had. He got up and kissed the top of my head like punctuation and said, "I need a couple of days. I'm not going anywhere, but I need to know if you were ever going to let me meet her, the woman who built it, because that's the one I proposed to, whether you knew it or not." And I drove home and sat in my car outside my building for 1 hour. And friends, I am not ashamed to tell you that was the night the concrete finally cracked, 9 years late, in a parking lot, over a steering wheel. All of it, the church basement and the pill case and the laughing tables and the 11 words, every swallowed clapback coming up at once. And somewhere in the middle of that flood, very clear, like a voice from a kitchen chair, the question resolved itself into its actual shape. It was never, how do I protect the company? Priya could protect the company in her sleep. It was, who gets to be at your table? And I had been letting the wrong people answer that my whole life, and the 2 men who had earned a seat, one with a twist tie ring and one with a fountain pen, were both waiting to see what I did next, and the people threatening me had never once, not one time in 32 years, been made to sit with a consequence. So, 3 phone calls, the next morning, in order. Call 1, Daniel, voicemail, on purpose this time, gentle. I said, "You asked if you would ever meet her. Friday, 4 o'clock, your classroom, by the garden. Bring the red pen. She has some things to show you." Call 2, Priya, and I will summarize call 2, because it ran 90 minutes and Priya swore in 2 languages. By that afternoon, a firm Priya described as the legal equivalent of a wolf sanctuary had been retained. Craig's little kitchen island presentation, it turned out, was a violation of his non-disclosure agreement so clean, so total, so beautifully documented by his own bragging text to Brooke, that Priya laughed for 11 seconds when she saw them. I have the voicemail saved. 11 seconds. And call 3. Call 3 was to a cedar study, and it was short, and I want to give it to you whole, because it is my favorite phone call of my life. He answered on the second ring, himself, no assistant. I said, "Mr. Voss." "Edward." "It's Maya." My family found the folder, and they want a third of the company by the wedding, or they will announce me from the dance floor. Silence, 1 second, 2. And then Edward Voss said, in exactly the voice of a man being handed a gift he had not dared put on his list, Maya, may I come to the wedding with a toast prepared? And friends, standing in my kitchen, looking at my reflection in the window where 9 years of hiding had looked back at me 2 nights before, I felt my grandmother's whole crooked smile arrive on my own face, and I said the 11 words back to him, the other 11, mine. Yes, and Edward, let my father go first. He always goes first. Friday, 4 o'clock, I met a schoolteacher by a butterfly garden and introduced him to the woman who built Marigold. I brought my laptop and the framed index card and a folding chair, and I sat him down where Marcus asked his question. And I gave Daniel Hale the investor presentation nobody on Wall Street ever got. 2 hours. The dashboard with 4 million families on it. The hiring memo about the pill case. The first user email I ever printed from a trucker's wife in Ohio that says, I slept 6 hours last night for the first time in 2 years, whoever you are. And the letter, the one his father highlighted, and when he read the second paragraph out loud, nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons, his voice did a thing in the middle of it because he had spent 4 years on a staircase with a yellow legal pad being the whole system for his dying mother, and he understood in one line what I had built and why I could never sell it. When it got dark, we were still there, and the marigolds along the fence were black shapes on gold, and Daniel closed the laptop and was quiet. And then he said, okay, 2 things. Thing 1, I am going to marry both of you. Thing 2, and here his voice went back to normal, which is to say 7th grade. Thing 2, you are worth 9 figures and you let me buy the $12 wine for a year and a half. And I want you to know I will be teaching this as an ethics unit. Friends, that is when I knew we were going to make it. Grief gets tea in that family. Forgiveness gets jokes. Now, the wedding. Before I walk you in, if this story has earned it, this is a good moment. Pause and tap, like if you are staying for these toasts, and if somebody in your family is a Craig, or a Brooke, or a scoreboard with a carving knife, put a flower in the comments for the roses in your life who saw you early. Marigolds preferred. All right. 2nd Saturday of October. The orchard. 200 people. Hay bales, apples, kids from Daniel's classes chasing each other between the tables, and the trees doing that thing October trees do, going up like slow gold fireworks. My family arrived glowing, friends, triumphant, and I want you to understand why, because it is the engine of everything that follows. After my mother's phone call on Priya's instruction, I had said exactly 1 sentence to my parents, delivered sweetly 3 days before. You are right, Mom. Let's settle everything at the reception, in front of everyone. They heard surrender. Craig heard a closing. He wore, I am not making this up, a pocket square that matched Brooke's dress, and he spent the cocktail hour telling 2 of Daniel's cousins about synergies. My mother had even, and here is the ice sculpture coming back. I promised you it would be funnier, smuggled in an ice sculpture, ordered behind our backs as her gift, a giant frozen number pair meant to stand for the family's new united front, 2 swans making a heart. Keep an eye on the swans. They have a role. The ceremony was perfect, and it is none of the internet's business except one detail. Daniel's ring inside the band is engraved with a twist tie. The engraver thought we were unwell. We are. Dinner, cake, dusk coming down through the strings of lights, and then the microphone, and my father rising, tapping his glass, folding his notes into his jacket. No notes needed. He had been giving this toast his whole life. And friends, I want you to know I just sat there, hands in my lap, because 10 days earlier, in a parking lot, over a steering wheel, I had finally finished my grandmother's course, 1000 level, the last class. You cannot stop a man from raising his glass. You can only control who stands up after him. Here is my father's toast. Word for word, I said you would get both, and you get both. He said, 200 people, folks, for our little Maya, who would have believed it. Daniel, son, welcome to the family. You are officially, and he paused and turned to the crowd and cued them with his glass, the way a conductor cues the brass. You are officially the first thing our Maya has ever finished. And the room, my side of it anyway, laughed on command, and my mother laughed, and Brooke laughed and squeezed Craig's arm, and my father stood there in the applause of it, shining, and added, No, in all seriousness, she got there in the end, and she had help, and family is what it is all about, and you will all be hearing more about that tonight. And he winked, actually winked, at Craig, and sat down. To my knowledge, friends, that is the last joke my father has ever told about me. Because the chair next to the head table scraped back, and Edward Voss stood up, unfolding one piece of paper. You could feel the room recalculate. Half the guests knew exactly who he was, and the other half knew immediately by watching the first half. He did not tap his glass. Men like Edward do not tap the glass. The room taps itself. And in the new silence, my father-in-law put on his reading glasses, looked once at me, once at Daniel, and began, and here, word for word, is the toast that ended the scoreboard. He said, I am Edward Voss. Daniel is my son. I am told the tradition is to tell an embarrassing story about the groom, but my son has never embarrassed me. I have occasionally embarrassed him. So instead, with the bride's permission, I am going to tell you a story about a stranger. 4 years ago, my brother-in-law was dying, and my sister-in-law Lily, who is here tonight, showed me an app on her phone that was holding her family together. And I read a letter its founder writes to every new family, and one line of it has followed me around ever since. Nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. I run companies for a living, and I recognize the voice of a real builder, and I did what I do. I tried to buy it. For 11 months, the best acquisitions team I have ever fielded pursued the founder of Marigold, a company that today quietly coordinates care for over 4 million American families. We never found so much as a photograph. Our final offer was $90 million. It was declined in 9 words. The promise is not for sale, thank you for asking. He looked up from the paper. I have been declined before, he said, but never in a way that improved my opinion of the human race. So I gave up, and I confess I got old about it. I decided the founder of Marigold was the one person in my industry I would never get to meet. And then, this past summer, at an engagement dinner, at that table right over there, I listened to a toast about my future daughter-in-law. I was told she never finished anything. I was told she was tech support. I was told she had, quote, such a good heart. And later that same evening, that same young woman leaned across the table to comfort my Lily and told her that nobody plans for the Tuesday afternoons. He took off the reading glasses. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I have spent 11 months and considerable money searching for Monsieur Merritt, the founder of Marigold, whom my own investigators concluded was probably a man named Michael. Merritt was Rose Merritt Callahan's maiden name. She was a farm wife who raised marigolds from seed in egg cartons, and she died 9 years ago, holding the hand of the granddaughter who left college to care for her for 3 years, while this family called it babysitting. That granddaughter took $12,000 of inheritance and a note 11 words long, and built alone in secret in 9 years the most important company in American caregiving. I have verified every word I am saying. It is the finest balance sheet I have ever audited, and I have audited nations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my unbearable honor to introduce you, properly, for the first time, to my daughter-in-law, the founder and sole owner of Marigold, Maya, who has, as far as I can determine, never once in her life failed to finish anything that mattered. And then, friends, Edward Voss raised his glass and turned deliberately, so the whole orchard saw the axis of it, to face my father, and said the last 2 lines of his toast directly to him, gently, the way you close a file, to the bride. Every family has one, sir. You were right about that. You were only ever wrong about which one she was. I will not be able to describe the next 60 seconds to you properly. I have tried for 2 years. The sound a crowd makes when it stands up is not applause exactly. it is weather. Daniel's students were on their chairs. Aunt Lily was sobbing into her husband's shoulder, and he was on his feet too, with his cane, Parkinson's and all, and that is the pair I cried about. Priya, at table 9, held up her champagne like a woman who has read every clause of the moment and found it airtight. And my family. Friends, I looked. I am human. I looked. My mother had gone the colour of the tablecloth. Brooke's mouth was actually open, like a mailbox. My father sat very still with his glass halfway up, a man watching 30 years of scoreboard drain out of the stadium, and Craig the handshake, Craig of the pocket square, was doing the only honest math left to him, which was how many steps stood between him and the parking lot. And the ice swans, I promised you, the heat lamps had been moved for the dancing, and my mother's smuggled sculpture of family unity was melting at speed directly behind the head table. And by the time Edward said, sole owner, one swan had lost its head into the shrimp. And if you think I did not make eye contact with Priya at that exact moment, you have not been paying attention to who I am. What happened after is quick to tell, the way consequences are. Craig was terminated the following Wednesday, escorted out with a box, his NDA breach documented from his own phone, and the family's one asset, proximity, evaporated with his badge, and no lawsuit over Grandma's money was ever filed because Priya's wolf sanctuary sent one letter and the whole third of the company theory died of daylight. Brooke filed for divorce inside a year, and I take no joy in that, and only a little in the fact that the ice sculpture outlived the marriage in every way that counts. My mother did not speak to me for 5 months, then began sending recipes with no note, which in her language is an armistice, and we are now what I would call cordial neighbouring nations. We exchange holidays, we do not exchange keys, and when she once, one time, floated the phrase our family's company at a Christmas, I said, whose, and passed the potatoes, and it has not come back. Selective reconciliation, Priya calls it. Rose would have just said, you can love people from the correct distance, honey. And my father, friends, I saved him for last because his chapter is the one I did not predict. He got quiet after the wedding, not sulking quiet, off the air quiet like a station gone dark for maintenance. And in March, 5 months after, he called and asked, alone, stiff as a hinge, if he could see the company. Not the valuation, the company. So I flew him up and I walked my father through Marigold's one real office, the small one we finally opened for the support teams, and he shook hands and said little. And then we came to the last room, the one I told you about, where I keep the frame. It is the room where our care line answers calls at 3 a.m. from people who are drowning. It is the heart of the whole company and it has a name on the door, the Rose Merit Room. And under the nameplate, in a simple frame, is an index card. 11 words in arthritic uphill handwriting. Bet on yourself just once, honey. The whole pot. Love, Rose. My father stood in front of his mother's handwriting for a long time, friends. Long enough that the room got tactfully busy around us. And when he turned around, he did not give a speech. He is not built for the speeches that matter. None of us Callahans are. We are all recovering scoreboard people. He said, 30 years, I told everyone you couldn't finish, and she knew better the whole time, and she told you where I couldn't hear it. And then my father, who once said the scoreboard has no column for wiping counters, looked back at the card and said quietly, I was keeping the wrong books. That is all I got. That is the entire apology. 9 words, one for every year of the dark. And I want to tell you something I have learned twice now, once from a fountain pen and once from an index card. From certain men, 9 words is the whole pot. We are not close, my father and I. But every spring since, a check arrives at the Marigold Foundation from his dealerships, substantial, with the memo line filled out in his own hand. The memo says, Tuesday afternoons. I let him have the column. Rose kept a ledger of kindness. Friends. Somebody has to keep the books. There is one more repair I have to show you before the ending, because the wedding fixed my family's books, but it also opened a second ledger, older than mine, and I got to watch that one balance too. Edward and Daniel, you remember the shape of it. A boy on a staircase with a yellow legal pad, a father who built a cathedral of care with no conductor in it, 15 years of polite distance, a name changed to Hale. The toast cracked something open there too, friends, though it took me a while to see it, because the crack ran quietly, the way it does with men who read more than they say. It started on the honeymoon, actually. The famous honeymoon morning, the one I had scheduled for my coward's confession that never got to happen. We spent it instead on a cabin porch with coffee, and Daniel was quiet in a new way. And finally, he said, "Can I ask you something about my father?" He said, 11 months, Maya. He chased your company for 11 months. The man delegates everything. He has people whose whole job is wanting things for him. And he read a letter on Aunt Lily's phone and drove the chase himself for 11 months. Why? And I realized, friends, sitting there with my coffee, that Edward had never told him. So I did. I told Daniel about the study, and about Miriam, and the 14 specialists who never spoke, and the cathedral with no conductor. And then I told him the sentence his father had said with his glasses off, the one I had been carrying like a stone I did not know where to set down. My son was the app, Maya. A teenager with a legal pad was the entire coordination layer for the best-funded patient in America. And he blames me for what those years were. And he is not wrong. Daniel put his cup down and looked at the lake for a long time. He said, he knows about the legal pad. I never told him about the legal pad. And I said, he knows everything, sweetheart. It's his whole condition, knowing everything and saying 9 words of it. You can buy it honestly, by the way. 3 weeks after we got home, Daniel drove out to the stone house alone, first time in years without a holiday as an excuse. And I do not know most of what was said in that study, and I have never asked because I know how locked rooms work, better than anyone. But I know 2 things came out of it. The first is that on the wall of that cedar study, next to the framed monarch butterfly signed D. Voss, age 9, there now hangs a second frame, and inside it is a page from a yellow legal pad, 15 years old, a boy's careful columns of medications and questions, and under it a small brass plate that says, the first coordination layer. Miriam's boy built the prototype, Friends. Edward just finally filed it correctly. And the second thing, Marigold and Voss Health signed the partnership that winter. On Priya's paper, every clause, the pilot went into discharge planning across 11 states. And the announcement release named the founder M. Merritt and quoted her one line. And you already know the line. But buried in the deal, on my terms and off the press release, there is a clause Edward asked for, humbly. The only thing he ever asked me for humbly. The caregiver support line, the 3 in the morning one. The room with my grandmother's name on the door is funded in perpetuity by a trust, and the trust has a name, and the name is Miriam. So, at 3 in the morning, somewhere in America, an exhausted daughter drowning on a Tuesday gets answered by a room named for one woman I never met and one I will never stop meeting, Rose and Miriam, 2 teachers, holding the same night shift. The scoreboard has no column for that. The ledger of kindness does. And Daniel calls his father every Sunday now, the way my mother called that little blue house every Sunday of her married life. And they talk about nothing, gardens, weather, 7th graders. And if you think talking about nothing every Sunday is nothing, friends, then nobody has ever gone quiet on you, and I am glad. One more small thing, and then the ending. Marcus, the boy from the butterfly garden, the one who asked if flowers can tell when you don't care about them. He is 16 now, and last summer, he interned at Marigold, our youngest ever, badge photo grinning like a jack-o'-lantern. And on his first day, I took him past the room with the index card and told him whose handwriting it was. And Marcus, 16, read it twice and said, "So did you though, bet the whole pot." And I said, "You're standing in it, kid. Flowers can tell, friends. Everything can tell." So that is the story of the 2 toasts, and here is the end of it, the real end, from this past May. Marigold turned 10. We held the party not at a venue, but at the office, families invited, and Daniel's old students, grown now, planted the beds out front. Marigolds, obviously, started from seed in egg cartons on the break room windowsill because some liturgies you do not modernize. And at golden hour, somebody put a glass in my hand and called for the founder to say something, and 200 faces turned, the way they do, and I stood there, the woman I was once afraid to become. And friends, I kept it short. I have excellent role models in short. I said, 30 years ago, my family gave me a nickname, and they were right. I am a serial starter. I started a garden with a schoolteacher, a company with a dead woman, and a family with both, and I have no intention of stopping, because my grandmother taught me the real secret, and I will leave you with it. Finishing was never the point. Planting is the point. Somebody laughed at every seed that was ever put in the ground, and the seed does not care, friends. The seed is busy. Grow it in the dark if you have to. Bloom where they have to watch, and whoever it is that laughs at your table, God love them. Save them a chair for later. Marigolds forgive everybody. It is the whole reason I plant them.